Do you believe in luck? Do you believe in things like unlucky numbers, like the number 13? Well, that's what I'm going to explore today, as to why the number 13 is unlucky, and to see if I can help you sort of see a way through getting past why it's unlucky so it doesn't affect you in the future. Welcome to my moment of reflection. My name is Mandy Cran. I've been doing these moments of reflection for about 5 years, really with the aim of helping you take a step out of your busy day and just to see things in a slightly different light. Because sometimes just that slightly different perspective can help massively in all sorts of ways. Please like and share as we go through, and especially if you think that somebody at this would help, then please pass it on to them. So the quote for this week is, "Shallow men believe in luck, strong men believe in cause and effect." So, the number 13. I need to explain to you why the number 13 is unlucky. Now, it's going to take me a little bit of time, but please bear with it because it's a really interesting story. I'm sure you will have heard of the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar were founded in the Holy Land, so in what's now Israel, Gaza Strip, that sort of area, just after the First Crusade, so back in the sort of 1100s. And they were formed because after the First Crusade and they took Jerusalem, to go back into Christian hands from Muslim hands, an awful lot of Christian pilgrims would then travel to the Holy Land to go and see the sites and the relics and so on. But the problem was an awful lot of these pilgrims were being attacked by Muslims because, of course, they wanted to get their lands back. And so in order to protect the Muslims, the Knights of the Temple were set up. So a small group of monks who were also fighting men, and their accommodation was in the Temple on the Mount. So Knights of the Temple, Knights Templar. So that was their job, to protect pilgrims. So therefore they only really fought when they had to, so defensively. And obviously more pilgrims came and their numbers started to increase. And in the Second Crusade, the King of France at the time actually personally led the crusade from France all the way through Europe to the Holy Lands. And the Knights Templar went along to assist in sort of protecting and advising militarily. One of the things about the Knights Templar was when you joined, you had to give up all your lands, you had to effectively be completely poor, so you gave up all your possessions, all your properties, you became a monk. You had a strict vow of discipline, you had to obey orders, you weren't allowed to retreat from the battlefield, and lots of very, very strict ways in which they operated. And that meant they were very disciplined. And therefore, as a fighting force, they were also actually extremely useful. And they were very good. They knew the Holy Land. They lived there for many, many years. And so in terms of the pilgrims coming on the Second Crusade, or the soldiers coming on the Second Crusade, they knew the layout of the land. So actually they were really good at advising the king in many ways. And if it hadn't been for the Templars, then the Second Crusade would never actually have got to the Holy Land at all. Anyway, by the time they got to the Holy Land, the king was completely broke. And the only way that he could actually carry on the crusade was to borrow money. And so he went to the Templars and said, "I need money to keep the crusade going." And of course their goal, being Christian men, was to do the same. So they mortgaged all their lands pretty much. They almost bankrupted themselves to give the king the money he needed to help the Second Crusade see the conclusion. So the King of France was in a huge amount of debt to the Knights Templar. Anyway, the crusades carried on, and of course more and more people joined. Richard Lionheart, you'll remember, led the Third Crusade, was extremely successful because as more and more people joined the organisation, they had more lands, more properties. These then had to be managed, they had to be manned, they had to be, the crops harvested and sold and so on. And so as time and the years went by, the Templars got more and more wealthy, and they had increasing in business interest. They started to lend money in the way they had to the king. And so they became very, very powerful. And what's really interesting about the Templars is that their organisation and their strict discipline and their strict rules and codes of conduct meant that they had a European-wide organisation that was extremely efficient. The kings and the countries around Europe at the time were actually very haphazard and were all fighting each other, and they didn't have the systems in place like the Templars had. So increasingly, people were looking at the Templars and actually being very jealous of what they had. They were exempt taxes. The Pope had given them virtually complete autonomy to do what they liked. They were effectively only answerable to God, not to any king. So you can see that some of the kings would start to get a little bit frustrated at actually how much power and influence the Templars had. Eventually, of course, after the Fifth Crusade, they left the Holy Land, and therefore their reason for existence in terms of protecting pilgrims had actually disappeared. But by that stage, they were so big anyway, that sort of didn't matter really, but a lot of people just started to look quite enviously at what they possessed. So then Philip of France became, so a few kings later on, became much more conscious of how much he still owed the Templars. And of course that debt was growing all the time. And I'm sure if you think about national debt now, you can sort of see where this is going. So he owed a huge debt to the Templars, and he looked increasingly jealously at their property and their wealth. So he decided the best way to wipe out the debt was to wipe out the Templars. So on Friday, 13th of October, 1307, the master and all his chief soldiers and heads were basically taken into prison, tortured and forced to confess to heresy. And they were forced to confess to some of the most horrific things. And there was actually an inquest after years later by the Pope, and they were all absolved of any type of heresy. It was all these confessions were acquired after torture. Anyway, most of them were burnt at the stake or killed in other ways. And the order wasn't quite obliterated, but certainly the persecution that went on across Europe was absolutely terrible, really, really terrible. Some countries weren't quite so bad. England was a bit more relaxed about it, but ultimately when the Pope initially banned the order, then they had to do the same, but they weren't as bad at the persecution as the French was. Anyway, so as a result of that, the Templars disappear. The King of France writes off his debt in one fell swoop, and acquires most of the land and the money from the Templars. Not all, but quite a lot. So you can see that in terms of the shockwaves that would have reverberated around Europe, this was a European-wide organisation. Friday the 13th became a very unlucky day. But what I really wanted to get to today, the point of this, is that the 13th is a human construction, a date. It's just a random date. And if you think of all the other disasters that have happened in the world, they don't all happen on the 13th. It just so happened that was the day that he chose, Friday the 13th of October. So if we're thinking about luck and unlucky numbers, then we actually need to think about, well, actually, why is 13 unlucky? It's an accident of a date. It could have been any number. It could have been 6, it could have been 3, it could have been whatever it was. So I think we need to take a step back from things like thinking 13 is unlucky. And I know they don't have them in planes. There's no row 13 in planes, and there's no many hotels don't have a floor 13 either. But actually, luck is what you make, and there's no doubt that in anything in life, you can have the odd random luck. Absolutely, you might win a lottery ticket, but the odds are 14 million to 1. But actually, if you do something and you practice something more and more and more and get better and better and better at it, for example, take sports, if you practice shooting a goal more and more and more, you're going to get better results, you're going to get better ratios, and therefore you become luckier. And there's a famous quote that says, the more shots I take, the luckier I get, by a very famous American sportsman. So I would say that actually don't go looking for luck, work hard, apply yourself to whatever you're doing, practice and practice and practice and get better and better and better at what you do, whether it's a job, it's a sport, a hobby, whatever it might be, and you'll find that actually luck will come along behind that. So that's my thought for the day. I hope you enjoyed it. If we haven't met yet, my name is Mandy Cran, and people come to me when they realise they need to make changes in their life if they want to have better health and quality family time in the years ahead. So here's a question for today. Would you like better luck? Would you like your luck to change? Are things not quite going as well as they might be for you at the moment? Well, I might be able to help with that. Why don't you send me a message, we can have a chat, and let's see if I can help you get to a better place. So next Friday, I'm going to be talking about rocks. So do join me next Friday, 10 o'clock live here on Facebook, and have a fabulous week.